Grandfather.
How are you?
We're here.
You all like you lost like $1 million or something. As we continue the kind of meditation and reflection on the theme of grace along the spiritual path that the Lord has laid for us, we come to this very special place. How appropriate that here finally we hear our brother Pilgrim Bruce Brisky finally play the organ. Right where we come to Vienna, center of art and music, culture, beauty. And as we gather together here in this church in Donau City, I'd like to invite us to do a little kind of thinking about the grace that comes to us through the priesthood and the diaconate and the people that have been called in a specific way to serve as leaders, not so much leaders, but as servants of the church. It's quite interesting in the sacristy here. As I walk in, and we walk in here, we find somebody. Is he Indian? He's Indian, right? I didn't ask him, but he could be Indian or something else in the region. And then we have a priest who looked like, I thought he was a sacristan. I thought he was the sacristan because he was helping out. And then we realized later on he's a priest. I was not the only one, even deacon also thought he was a sacristan. He's the pastor here, that guy. And yeah, so we have Indian, German, Filipino, American. It's interesting because I think that the Lord does call people to this specific vocation. And the people that He calls, I don't know what the Lord is thinking sometimes. And I'm not only talking about like even me being called, because in many ways I'm kind of a sore thumb, I'm kind of a weirdo. Admittedly a weirdo. But you know, when I was in the seminary with my classmates, sometimes we spend this time like thinking about who will make it to the priesthood and who won't. And you will be surprised who made it to the priesthood. The ones who made it to the priesthood were not the ones that were in the chapel every morning. Or there were some also that made it like that, right? But they were not the ones who always looked like this. Those are the ones that left after a week. Because we are called our humanity. And that's why some people ask me, you don't look like a priest, you don't have, or sometimes they say, you shouldn't be doing this because you're a priest. I don't know what I should not be doing as a priest, because I thought when God called me in my entirety. And sometimes God uses even those gifts that are weird. You don't know how many people have contacted me on Facebook and say, or in YouTube, saying that they feel comfortable telling me their secrets and their spiritual struggles that they cannot tell their own priest that looks like a priest, like always in the collar and always with a sad face, looking like he's going to bring down the arrows and flames from the sky, you know. And I don't know, maybe specifically this is where I am supposed to be. And that indeed there is a place for all kinds of priests with all kinds of personalities. Because the grace of God, and here's the point here, the grace of God is bigger than what you think it can do to anybody, even to me. And sometimes we get caught up in our own Kantian mentality. Immanuel Kant says that everything has to be specifically in a certain category. A priest has to look like this, a nun has to look like this, a doctor has to look like this, a nurse has to look like this, a teacher has to look like this. But the grace of God, through the centuries, has worked in the most surprising possible way. Look at what happened to the Jews. The Jews had a certain specific category about what the Messiah would look like when he would come. He would look exactly like this, right? He would be a king like David. They were looking for a king like David. What did God bring to them? A servant. Son of a carpenter from some obscure place in Nazareth. And the grace of God overflowed in him, through him, and with him. And so I think, I guess that's why I kind of like the surprise quality of this church, because the first thing that came to my head was, how the light of the light of God comes to us from all directions, from all different ways. And I think it is a disservice to the grace of God. It's a disservice to the way the Lord works when we think that we know exactly how God thinks. From our first reading today, we hear St. Paul giving some very specific tasks to his quote-unquote disciple, Titus. Here we hear that that Paul left Titus in Crete, according to the reading that Lisa read. He left him in Crete, and he wanted him to be able to also build the church. And he asked him to appoint sacerdos, to appoint priests or presbyters. Presbyters would be a very specific word. Presbyteros, right? Those presbyters of the church, of the people of God, in order to perpetuate the teaching. The grace of God is not really about the priest that is chosen. But the grace of God is the one that is at work through the priest, or through the deacon, or through the bishop, or through the minister, or through the religious man and woman. We need those priests. We need men and women to make the grace of God available. Because we know in many ways the grace of God is always mediated. It doesn't just fall from the sky. It's usually mediated in very specific ways. And mind you, now I'm going to expand this a little bit and say, mind you, you too in many ways are priests by virtue of your baptism. And so from that ordained ministry or ordained priesthood of people like myself who is offered to the service of the church, there is also each one of you who are meant to be a priest in your own unique way by virtue of your own baptism. What does that mean? It means that you too are called to be a grace, to be a vessel of grace for others. And so our gospel, we kind of have a sense that the Lord is calling people here to conversion, to a real transformation of the heart. He talks about how to settle disputes or disagreements, right? That is the ministry of reconciliation of the priest. He talks about increasing of the faith in the end. And that is done through prayer and instruction. And all these things are done through the ministry of the priesthood. In this church, then let us ask for the grace of the priesthood in our church. You know, in America, even in my diocese, specifically my diocese, and so many other places in the world, there is a real crisis for the priest, of the priesthood, in the priesthood. There are not as many priests now than even 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. A parish like mine in St. Teresa and Kankakee, there used to be 3 priests for less number of people, right? Now, more Hispanics, more parishioners, one priest. If this pattern continues, we are already starting to think about closing some of the churches. And when that happens, you know what suffers? The one that suffers are the people, are the faithful. Because it will be harder to have an access to the Eucharist, which is the one that unifies us together. It will be harder to access the sacraments. There will be less priests available to listen one-on-one with the people. So I think it is important that today we call people, young men and women, to the holy vocation of the priesthood. It is through this specific calling that the grace of God becomes available in a very incarnate way to all of us who believe. I have to say that the priest, Father Sunny, that you see now is a product of other priests and other people that believed in me or invested in me as a human being. I said this on the day I was installed at St. Teresa, because it came to me at that moment that I am who I am because of the investment of so many. And so we need to develop, we need to invest on it. We need to invest on the priesthood. And this is something that not only the priests need to do, it's the entire body of the church that needs to invest on the priesthood. Talk to others about it. Invite your children. Ask your grandchildren. Foster vocations throughout, in whatever way you can. Pray for the increase of vocations in the priesthood. As St. Paul knows what it's like to send someone out there to continue the work that he has begun. The Lord knows it all as He calls these men and these disciples to go out and be His heart, His hand, His feet to others, to the ends of the earth. So we ask the Lord today to grace us with a vocation to the religious life, to the priesthood and to the diaconate and to lay ministry as well. And that all of us may embrace this very special gift, the gift of our priesthood that we share with Jesus Himself, who is the high priest. Amen.